I landed after flying nearly 3,000 miles to see my son's new house, and the first thing he sent me was a text that said, "Don't knock. The neighbors think you're dead." I stood there with my phone in my hand, the glass doors of the airport sliding shut behind me, people brushing past with suitcases and loud voices, and I reread the message 3 times to make sure my eyes weren't playing tricks on me. 72 years old, heart still steady, bones aching from the flight, but very much alive, and apparently, according to my own child, officially buried. I didn't answer right away. I have learned at my age that silence sometimes tells you more than words ever could. I walked outside, waited for the shuttle, and sat down on a cold metal bench. The air smelled different here than back home in Arizona. Wetter. Younger somehow. I pulled my coat tighter and looked at the message again. No explanation, no apology, just instructions. Don't knock. Stay invisible. The flight had been long and uncomfortable. My knees had swollen, and the young man beside me kept falling asleep on my shoulder without apologizing. Still, I had endured it gladly. Ethan had finally bought a house. A real one, with a yard. He said it on the phone like it was a victory over something unnamed. I had sent money, quietly, the way I always did. For the down payment. For the lawyer. For the inspection, he said, was unexpected. I told myself that was what mothers did, even when they were no longer asked. As the shuttle rolled toward the rental car lot, I remembered how proud he'd sounded describing the place. 2 stories, new roof, good neighborhood. "You'll love it, Mom," he had said, "when you come." He hadn't said if. I took that as an invitation. That was my mistake. I picked up my rental car and drove slowly, following the navigation voice that sounded far too cheerful. When I turned onto his street, I recognized the house immediately from the photos he had sent. White siding, blue door, fresh mulch. I pulled over a block away and parked. My hands rested on the steering wheel longer than necessary. I could see his porch light was on, even though it was still early evening. Someone moved past the window. Laughter drifted out when the door opened briefly. He was home. So was his wife. They were warm, alive, and apparently unburdened by the presence of a mother who, for convenience, had been declared deceased. I thought about knocking anyway, just once, letting the neighbors see a ghost in sensible shoes, but I didn't. I read the message again. Don't knock. It wasn't fear in his words. It was management. Control. The kind that assumes compliance. I drove away. At the motel, the clerk handed me a key without looking up. The room smelled of detergent and old carpet. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed myself to feel tired. Not sad, not angry. Just tired in a way that went deeper than the body. I had not raised my son to erase me. I had raised him to stand on his own. Somewhere along the way, he learned that standing on his own was easier if I stayed conveniently out of sight. Dead women ask for nothing. Living ones eventually do. I placed my phone face down on the nightstand and lay back, staring at the ceiling. I had not crossed half a continent to make a scene. I had come to see who my son had become. It seemed I was about to learn more than I expected. I slept badly that night, not because of the bed or the noise from the highway, but because my mind would not stop arranging facts into their proper places. Age does that to you. You stop softening things. You stop lying to yourself. You begin to see patterns instead of excuses. In the morning, I made myself weak coffee from the little machine on the dresser and sat by the window. The parking lot was already full. Families, salesmen, a tired woman smoking by the ice machine, ordinary lives moving forward. Mine felt paused, as if someone had pressed a finger against my chest and said, "Wait here." I thought about why I had really come, not the housewarming. That was the story I told Ethan and myself because it sounded simple. The truth was heavier. I had been feeling myself fade for years, not physically, socially, emotionally. Calls returned late, if at all. Visits postponed. Conversations that stayed on the surface, where my life never quite came up. When Ethan married Lauren, he said it was just busy schedules. When holidays passed without an invitation, it was stress. When he stopped asking for my advice, it was independence. Every step had an explanation. I accepted them all because acceptance is easier than confrontation, and I was raised to believe that a mother's job was to make things easier. I picked up my purse and went out. I didn't drive to his house, not yet. I drove to a diner I'd passed the night before. Vinyl booths, chipped mugs, a waitress who called me honey without irony. I ate toast and eggs slowly, listening to fragments of conversations around me. People complained about taxes, weather, children who never called. I kept my eyes on my plate. At one point, the waitress asked if I was visiting family. I said yes. She smiled and said that was nice. I did not correct her. After breakfast, I drove past Ethan's neighborhood again, this time in daylight. It was quieter. Lawns trimmed too evenly. Flags on porches. The kind of place people choose because it looks respectable from the outside. I parked across the street and watched. A man walked his dog. A woman waved to a neighbor. No one looked twice at me. To them, I was just another older woman in a sedan. Harmless. Temporary. I remembered the first apartment Ethan had rented after college. He had called me in a panic about a leak under the sink. I'd wired money without hesitation. I remembered the second place, then the third. Each move upward had been cushioned by my savings, my silence. I told myself I was investing in his future. I never asked where that left me. My phone buzzed once. A message from Ethan. "We'll talk later. Just give me some time." No question, no concern. Just a request for delay, like moving an item on a calendar. I did not reply. Instead, I went back to the motel and opened the folder I carried with me everywhere. Deeds, bank statements, copies of checks, years of quiet support reduced to paper. I spread them out on the bed and looked at them carefully, one by one. Numbers have a way of telling the truth when people won't. By late afternoon, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't about neighbors, or embarrassment, or confusion. This was about convenience. And convenience, once chosen over love, changes the shape of everything that follows. I put the papers back, washed my face, and sat down again. I had not knocked on my son's door, but I had arrived all the same. And now that I was here, I wasn't going to disappear just because it suited him better that way. By the third day, the city had stopped feeling unfamiliar. That's how I knew the shock was wearing off and something steadier was taking its place. I woke before dawn, as I always do, and lay there, listening to trucks pass on the road behind the motel. At my age, routine becomes a kind of anchor. When something knocks you loose, you look for solid ground. I showered, dressed neatly, and combed my hair the way I always had. Nothing fancy, just orderly. I was raised to believe that even when things fall apart, you present yourself properly, especially then. I drove without a destination at first. Let the roads choose for me. I passed schools, office buildings, parks with wet grass and empty benches. I watched people starting their day with purpose. Coffee in hand. Doors opening. Lives in motion. No one knew who I was. No one knew I had been erased from my own son's story. There was a strange freedom in that. Around mid-morning, I stopped at a small grocery store. Bought fruit, bread, a jar of soup I liked. I could have eaten at the motel again, but I wanted to feel normal. Ordinary acts matter when your sense of self has been shaken. I paid in cash. The cashier asked if I needed help carrying the bag. I said no. My hands still worked. That, at least, had not been taken from me. Back in the room, I ate slowly and thought about the word Ethan had chosen. Dead. Not forgotten. Not distant. Dead. Final. Clean. Dead people don't call. They don't visit. They don't ask questions about where money came from or why promises changed. They don't remind you of who you used to be. I realized then that this hadn't started recently. This had been practiced, rehearsed. A story he'd been telling long enough to sound natural. You don't kill someone off in conversation unless you've already made peace with their absence. In the afternoon, I walked, just around the block. My joints protested, but they always did. I passed a playground where a young mother sat on a bench, scrolling on her phone while her child dug in the sand. I wondered if she knew how fast it would all go, how one day love could turn into obligation and obligation into inconvenience if you weren't careful about teaching respect. My phone rang once while I was out. I didn't answer. I knew it was Ethan without looking. I wasn't ready to hear him explain. Explanations are easy when you think the other person is weak enough to accept them. That evening, I drove past his house again. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I saw the lights on, the silhouette of movement through the curtains. Life going on smoothly, undisturbed by the woman who had made much of it possible. I felt no urge to cry, just a tightening in my chest, like a door closing quietly. Back at the motel, I sat on the bed and took out my notebook. Not the financial one, the other. The one where I wrote things down when my thoughts grew too heavy to carry alone. I wrote one sentence. I am not dead. I am just no longer convenient. Seeing it on paper steadied me. Words have weight. Once written, they don't slip away so easily. I turned off the light and lay down, hands folded on my stomach, breathing slowly. I didn't know yet what I would do, but I knew what I would not do. I would not beg. I would not apologize for existing. And I would not quietly return home pretending this was a misunderstanding. Whatever came next would be faced awake, standing, and very much alive. On the fourth morning, I finally decided to step closer to the lie itself. You can circle a wound only so long before you need to look at it directly. I put on my coat, checked myself in the mirror, and made sure I looked exactly like what I was. An older woman who had lived a full, respectable life and was not asking anyone's permission to exist. I drove to Ethan's street and parked 2 houses down in clear daylight. This time, I got out of the car. The air was cool, and the lawns still held the damp smell of early watering. Across the street, a woman about my age was kneeling near her flower bed, her gray hair tied back with a scarf. She looked up when she noticed me standing there, smiled politely, and wiped her hands on her jeans. "Lost?" she asked, not unkindly. "No," I said. "Just visiting." She nodded. the way people do when they think they understand more than they do. We stood there a moment, two women with time in our faces. Then she gestured toward Ethan's house. "Quiet family," she said. "Nice enough. Young couple. Bought the place last year." "Yes," I answered. "My son lives there." Her smile faltered, just slightly, not confusion, something else. "Oh," she said. "I'm sorry." The word hung between us. "I beg your pardon?" I asked. She straightened, clearly uncomfortable now. I mean, Ethan told us." She hesitated, searching my face for confirmation of something she already believed. "He said his mother passed away a few years ago. That's why no one ever saw family visiting." There it was, said plainly. No drama, no cruelty in her voice, just fact, as she understood it. I nodded once. "I see." She stared at me, color draining from her face as the truth settled in. "Then you're alive," I said. "Very much so." Her mouth opened, then closed. "Well, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," I told her. And I meant it. The lie wasn't hers to explain. She glanced nervously toward the house. "Do they know you're here?" "Yes," I said. "At least he does." She shook her head slowly, as if trying to make sense of something that didn't fit into her orderly understanding of the world. "That's unusual. That's one word for it." I thanked her for her time and walked back to my car. My hands were steady, my breathing calm. There was no rush of anger, no desire to confront anyone right then. Lies confirmed lose their power. They stop being shadows and turn into objects you can step around. Back at the motel, my phone rang. Ethan again. I let it ring until it stopped. A message followed. "Can you please not talk to the neighbors? You're complicating things." Complicating things, not hurting him, not shocking people. Complicating. I read the message once and set the phone down. That afternoon, I made an appointment. Not with him, with a lawyer whose name I found through a quiet search. Someone who specialized in property agreements and family trusts. I didn't rush. I chose carefully. You don't make important decisions while trembling. By evening, the truth sat fully formed in my chest. My son had not buried me out of panic or shame. He had done it for ease. Dead mothers don't show up unannounced. They don't ask questions. They don't expect a place in the house they helped pay for. I lay down that night without turning on the television. I didn't need noise to distract me anymore. The fog was gone. What remained was clear, sharp, and surprisingly calm. You can recover from many things in life. Loss, loneliness, even betrayal. But erasure changes the rules entirely, and once you understand that, you stop playing the game the same way. On the 5th day, I stopped pretending I was only passing through. That is the quiet shift most people miss. The moment when a visit becomes a reckoning. I woke up knowing I would no longer move around my son's life like a trespasser afraid of being seen. I dressed carefully, not out of vanity, but out of respect for myself. A clean blouse, low shoes, my hair pinned the way it always had been when I needed to think clearly. I ate breakfast in the motel room and left the television off. I wanted no voices but my own. I drove back to his neighborhood again, this time parking directly across the street. In full view, no hiding. I sat there for a while, watching the house as if it were a photograph I was finally seeing without sentiment. The paint was new, the windows clean. Curtains chosen by someone who wanted light but not exposure. A place designed to look welcoming while keeping certain things firmly inside. A delivery truck pulled up. The driver carried boxes to the door. Ethan signed for them, smiling, relaxed. He looked well. That mattered to me more than I expected, and then it didn't. Love does not excuse everything. It never has. I stepped out of the car and walked slowly down the sidewalk. The concrete was uneven in places. I noted that automatically. A lifetime of noticing what needed repair does not disappear overnight. When I reached the front of the house, I stopped at the edge of the lawn. I did not approach the door. A neighbor waved from across the street. A different one this time. I nodded back. Word travels quickly in quiet places. I could feel it in the way eyes lingered just a moment longer than politeness required. The dead woman had apparently returned, and people did not know where to file that information. I turned away before Ethan saw me and walked back to the car. I wasn't ready to speak yet. Observation still served me better than confrontation. In the afternoon, I went to the county records office, not because I expected a surprise, but because I believed in verifying what I already knew. The clerk was efficient, bored in the way people get when they handle other people's lives all day long. Deeds, filings, signatures. My name appeared where it should. My money, documented. Quietly embedded in the foundation of a life that now claimed no room for me. I felt no triumph, only confirmation. On the drive back, my phone rang again. Ethan's name lit up the screen. I answered this time. "Mom," he said quickly, like a man relieved he'd finally been heard. "We need to talk." "I'm aware," I replied. There was a pause. "Are you telling people things?" "I'm telling the truth when asked," I said. "That's usually how it works." He sighed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "No," I said. "I'm just no longer making it easy." Silence. I could hear traffic on his end. Life continuing. "Lauren's upset," he said finally. "The neighbors are confused." "They were lied to," I answered. "Confusion is a natural response." "You could have called first," he said. "I did," I replied. "Many times, over many years." Another pause. Longer this time. "We'll figure something out," he said, and I knew then he still believed this was a situation to be managed, not a wound to be addressed. "We will," I agreed. "Just not the way you're used to." I ended the call before he could respond. That evening, back in the motel, I sat by the window and watched the sky darken. I thought about how easily a person can be erased when they make themselves too accommodating, how kindness without boundaries teaches others exactly how little it costs to ignore you. I was done being easy. Whatever came next would be deliberate, measured, and irreversible. On the 6th day, I finally allowed myself to listen instead of watching. Observation had given me clarity, but clarity alone does not finish a thing. I needed to hear my son speak when he believed he was still in control. I called him just after 9 in the morning. I chose the hour deliberately. People reveal more of themselves when they are busy and unprepared. He answered on the second ring. "Mom," he said, cautious now. "I was hoping you'd call." "I'm sure you were," I replied. There was movement on his end. A door closing, a car unlocking. He was stepping away, isolating the conversation, the way he always did when something mattered, but not enough to be public. "Look," he began, "this whole thing has gotten out of hand." "It started that way," I said calmly. "You just didn't notice." He exhaled sharply. You have to understand how this looks." "I do," I said. "You told people I was dead." "That's not—" He stopped himself. "I didn't mean it like that." "How did you mean it?" I asked. Silence. Then, carefully, "It was just easier." There it was. No anger, no shame, just honesty, stripped of decoration. "Easier for whom?" I asked. "For everyone," he said quickly. "Lauren, the neighbors, work friends. Questions come up when parents are involved. Expectations, comparisons. You know how people are." "I know how you are," I answered. He bristled at that. I could hear it in the way his breath changed. "You're twisting this." "No," I said. "I'm finally hearing it straight." He tried another angle. "You've always been private. You don't like crowds. You never pushed to be involved." "I didn't push," I agreed. "I supported, quietly, consistently, and I waited for you to meet me halfway." "That's not fair," he said. "I never asked you to send money." "You never had to," I replied. "You learned early that I'd do it without being asked." Another pause, longer this time. "So what do you want?" he asked. Not softly, practically, like a man discussing logistics. "I want you to stop pretending I don't exist," I said. "And I want you to understand that the way you made your life easier came at my expense." He scoffed. "This is turning into a bigger deal than it needs to be." "That's because you're still thinking in terms of inconvenience," I told him. "I'm thinking in terms of truth." "You're being dramatic," he said. "I'm being accurate," I replied. The line went quiet. I imagined him gripping the steering wheel, jaw set, annoyed that the conversation wasn't bending the way it usually did. I had seen that posture before, when he was a teenager and realized charm would not save him. "We can fix this," he said finally. "We'll tell people you moved away, that we lost touch. Something." "No," I said. "You won't rewrite me again." "So what? You're going to humiliate us?" His voice sharpened. "I'm not going to do anything," I answered. "I'm simply not going to disappear." I ended the call before he could respond. Afterward, I sat very still. My hands were steady. My heart was calm. The conversation had confirmed what I needed to know. This was not a misunderstanding waiting to be cleared up. It was a choice he had made and defended because it benefited him. That afternoon, I took out my papers again. Not with sadness this time, but with purpose. When someone shows you how little they value your presence, the only sensible response is to reconsider your participation. I had spent years teaching my son how to stand without me. Now it was time to let him try. By the 7th day, I understood that truth has a way of spreading without effort once it is released. I did nothing dramatic. I spoke to no one on purpose. And still, the air around my son's house had changed. I felt it when I drove through the neighborhood that morning. Doors opened a little more slowly. Conversations stopped when I passed. Not rudely, just long enough to notice. People were recalibrating their understanding of things. The dead woman had turned out to be walking, breathing, very real. I parked near the corner and watched from a distance. Ethan was outside, speaking to a man from next door. Their conversation looked polite but stiff. Arms crossed, smiles that didn't quite settle. I didn't need to hear the words to know what was being asked. Questions don't stay buried when the foundation shifts. I didn't approach them. I had learned enough about timing in my life to know when presence speaks louder than confrontation. Instead, I drove to the public library and sat there for an hour, reading a book I barely absorbed. I wasn't there for the words. I was there for the quiet. When I returned, Ethan's car was gone. His wife's remained. I parked and stepped out, not toward the house, but toward the sidewalk. Lauren emerged a moment later, keys in hand. She stopped when she saw me. Up close, she looked younger than I remembered. Tired, too. The kind of tired that comes from managing a life built on appearances. "So," she said after a moment, "you're real." "I've always been," I answered. She shifted her weight. "Ethan didn't mean for it to go this far." "It went exactly as far as he needed it to," I said. She folded her arms, defensive. "You don't understand what it's like. The expectations, the pressure." "I raised him," I replied. "I understand pressure." She hesitated, then spoke more softly. "He said you didn't want to be involved." "That was easier to believe," I said. "For both of you." Her face tightened. "What do you want?" It was the same question Ethan had asked. The same assumption. That this was a negotiation. "I want you to know that whatever story you built your comfort on was paid for with my silence," I said. "And I'm no longer offering it." She looked away. "You're causing problems." "I didn't start them," I replied. She left without another word. That evening, my phone buzzed repeatedly. Messages from Ethan, from numbers I didn't recognize. Concern disguised as curiosity. I read none of them. I had already said what mattered. Back in the motel, I sat on the edge of the bed and realized something important. I was no longer waiting for an apology. Apologies are about restoring balance without changing behavior. What I needed was alignment between truth and consequence. For years, I had accepted a role that shrank me. I had done it willingly, believing love required flexibility. But love without regard is not love. It is convenience dressed up as loyalty. The neighbors now knew I existed. His wife knew the story had holes. And my son knew I would not retreat. I slept well that night for the first time since I arrived. Not because things were resolved, but because I finally understood my position. I was no longer reacting. I was choosing. On the 8th day, I went to see a lawyer. Not out of spite, not in anger. I went because I had finally reached the point in life where clarity demanded structure. Emotions pass. Decisions stay. I wanted mine written down. The office was small and quiet, tucked between a dental clinic and a tax service. No polished marble, no grand gestures, just shelves of binders and a woman behind a desk who looked me in the eye when she spoke. That mattered to me. She asked why I was there. I told her the truth without drama. I told her about the house. The money? The lie? I told her my son was alive and well, and that apparently I was not. At least not in the version of his life that was most convenient to him. She didn't interrupt. She took notes. When I finished, she folded her hands and said, "Let's look at what you actually control." That sentence alone was worth the visit. We went through documents one by one, contributions, agreements. The quiet ways money binds people long after words have stopped. I learned what could be undone and what could only be redirected. What required notice, what required resolve. "You're not taking anything away," she said at one point. "You're correcting an imbalance." That stayed with me. By the time I left, my head felt clear in a way it hadn't in years. Not light, clear. There is a difference. Lightness fades. Clarity holds. Outside, I sat in my car for a long moment before starting the engine. I thought about all the years I had avoided this step because it felt too harsh, too final. Mothers are taught to soften everything, even when it costs them their footing. I drove back toward the motel, but halfway there I changed direction and went instead to a small cafe. I ordered soup and sat by the window. People passed. Couples argued softly. A young woman laughed too loudly at her phone. Life, uncomplicated and ongoing. My phone buzzed once. A message from Ethan. We should all sit down together and talk like adults. I stared at the words for a long time. Adults. That word again. As if adulthood were something you could invoke only when consequences appeared. I typed back slowly. I am talking like an adult. I'm just no longer speaking only when it's comfortable for you. He didn't reply. That evening, I organized my papers neatly, the way I always had. Old habits are not weakness. They are memory. Each page went into its place. Each decision felt less like a reaction and more like a return to the woman I had been before I started shrinking myself for someone else's ease. I slept early. No dreams. Just rest. The next steps were already forming. Not rushed. Not emotional. Just steady. I had been declared dead without my consent. Now I was going to decide, very carefully, what lived on. On the 9th day, I finally allowed myself to look backward without sentimentality. Not to relive anything, but to take inventory. There is a difference, and it matters. Memory can be a comfort, but it can also be evidence. I sat at the small desk in the motel room and opened my folder again, this time with no rush and no tightness in my chest. I wasn't searching for justification anymore. I was counting years, patterns, habits that had slowly trained both of us into our roles. I remembered the first time Ethan asked for help as an adult. He was 24, voice strained, talking about a temporary cash flow issue. I didn't ask many questions. I wired the money the same day. He thanked me, promised to pay it back, and never mentioned it again. I didn't bring it up either. I told myself that was what support looked like. Then there were the smaller things. Insurance gaps, repairs that couldn't wait, legal fees he hadn't planned for. Each time, I told myself it was the last. Each time, I believed him when he said things were finally stabilizing. I see now that stability never arrived because it didn't need to. I was the buffer, the quiet solution. What struck me most wasn't the money. It was how naturally I had adjusted my expectations downward. How I stopped expecting calls unless something was needed. How I learned not to mention my own life unless asked directly. How I praised his independence while quietly financing it. I had mistaken proximity for closeness, assistance for connection. When he stopped asking for advice, I told myself that was growth. When he stopped visiting, I called it busyness. When my name disappeared from stories he told about his life, I assumed it was coincidence. It wasn't. It was editing. People don't erase others suddenly. They do it in drafts. I thought about the word he used again. Dead. Not gone. Not distant. Dead. A finished thing. A closed chapter. He had decided that my role in his life was complete, while still drawing from what I provided. I had been useful, but no longer visible. That realization did not break me. It steadied me. In the afternoon, I took a walk around the motel grounds. The weather had warmed. A man was fixing a loose fence panel, cursing under his breath. I smiled at him in passing. He nodded back. Simple recognition. Human. It struck me how little it takes to acknowledge someone's existence, and how deliberate you have to be to deny it. Back in my room, I made a list, not of grievances, of boundaries. Things I would no longer explain, things I would no longer fund. Silences I would no longer fill just to keep peace that was never equally shared. I did not feel angry while writing it. I felt precise. That evening, Ethan sent another message. Longer this time. Softer in tone. Words like family and misunderstanding and moving forward. I read it once, then set the phone aside. The message wasn't for me. It was for the version of me he hoped still existed, the one who would smooth everything over and accept less so he could keep more. That woman was very tired. I turned off the light and lay down, hands folded, breathing slow and even. I had not come here to punish anyone. I had come because something in me finally refused to stay buried. Being declared dead had clarified something essential. You don't argue your way back into existence. You reclaim it by choosing where you stand, and then staying there. On the 10th day, I ran into my son without planning to. I was leaving the pharmacy with a small paper bag of things I didn't strictly need, but had bought anyway, just to remind myself that I still could. As I stepped outside, I saw him across the parking lot. Ethan stood near his car, phone pressed to his ear, shoulders tense, the way they had always been when something wasn't going his way. For a moment, neither of us moved. He saw me at the same time I saw him. There was no chance to prepare, no time to choose the right expression. Whatever was between us had to stand on its own. He ended the call abruptly and walked toward me. Up close, I noticed details I hadn't seen from a distance, the faint line between his eyebrows, the tiredness around his eyes. He looked older than he had a week ago. "Mom," he said, not angry, not warm, just careful. "Ethan?" I replied. We stood there, two people connected by blood and history, suddenly unsure what to do with either. Cars passed behind us. Someone laughed near the entrance. Life continued, indifferent to our pause. "You shouldn't be here," he said finally. "I'm aware you'd prefer that," I answered. He rubbed his face with one hand, a gesture from childhood I remembered well. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. People seeing, talking." "I've been seen my whole life," I said. "This is the first time you seem to notice." "That's not fair," he snapped, then caught himself, lowered his voice. "You know what I mean." "I do," I said. "You mean it's inconvenient." He exhaled slowly. "Why are you doing this?" The question wasn't curious. It was frustrated, as if I had broken an unspoken rule. "I'm not doing anything to you," I said. "I'm just no longer cooperating with the version of events that required me to be invisible." He shook his head. "You could have handled this quietly." "I did," I replied. "For years." We walked a few steps without realizing it, ending up near my car. He glanced at it, then back at me. "Lauren's parents are coming this weekend," he said, as if that explained something. "I'm sure they are," I answered. "They're asking questions," he continued, "about family." "And you don't know what to tell them," I said. His jaw tightened. "You don't understand how complicated this is." "I understand it perfectly," I said. "You built a life where I didn't fit neatly, so you removed me from the picture." "That's not what happened," he said. "It's exactly what happened," I replied, without raising my voice. He looked around, then back at me. "What do you want from me?" he asked again, irritation slipping through. I met his eyes. "I want you to tell the truth," I said. "Not because it will make things easier, but because it's the only thing left that's honest." He laughed once, short and sharp. "And if I don't?" "Then you'll keep living in a house supported by a lie," I said. "And I will make decisions accordingly." That got his attention. He straightened, eyes narrowing slightly. "Is that a threat?" "No," I said. "It's a boundary." We stood there another moment. He searched my face for hesitation. He didn't find it. "I have to go," he said finally. "So do I replied. I got into my car and drove away, hands steady on the wheel. In the rearview mirror, I saw him still standing there, alone, staring after me. For the first time since I arrived, I felt something settle into place. The conversation hadn't resolved anything, but it had shifted the balance, and he knew it. On the 11th day, the confrontation finally became unavoidable. I had observed, I had listened, and I had waited. But there is a moment when patience no longer counts. It is the moment when your presence alone forces a reckoning. I walked toward Ethan's house, not with malice, but with a clarity that left no room for negotiation. I carried only my purse and the quiet knowledge that I was no longer invisible. I rang the doorbell and waited. The sound of footsteps behind the door was faster than usual. Ethan opened it, his face registering surprise. "Mom," he said, voice tight. I stepped inside without hesitation. The house smelled clean and new, as it always had, with a faint trace of laundry detergent and the leather of furniture I had helped pay for. He tried to speak first. "You shouldn't be here," he said. We weren't expecting," I interrupted calmly. "I know exactly what you expected, and I am not it." His eyes widened. He searched for words, as if I had spoken in a language he did not understand. We I didn't think—" "You didn't think what?" I asked, still measured. "That your mother would be alive? That she would notice being erased from her own son's life? That she would choose to confront a lie instead of quietly accepting it?" My voice was steady, without anger, but heavy with truth. He swallowed, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't mean it like that. It was easier." "Everyone thought. Easier for you," I said. "Easier to keep appearances. Easier to avoid questions. Easier to pretend that removing me from the narrative would cost nothing. Easier for Lauren. Easier for your neighbors. Easier for your own convenience. But not easier for me." He flinched at the word convenience. "Mom, it's not what you think," he said. "I wasn't trying to hurt you. We thought—" "We thought what?" I pressed. "That I would vanish without protest? That I would let you declare me dead without consequence? That years of assistance, guidance, and investment could be erased with a few words?" His hands tightened into fists. "You're being unfair. You're dramatizing this. I didn't lie to anyone to hurt you. I didn't plan this." "No," I said. "You just acted as if it were natural that I should be silent and absent while you took what you needed. That is planning. That is deliberate. And I am done being silent." He ran a hand over his face again, frustrated, desperate. "I didn't know what else to do. You never interfered, so—" "I didn't interfere because I expected respect, not manipulation," I said firmly. "I expected honesty, not erasure. And now I will act in accordance with reality, not convenience." The room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. His wife, Lauren, appeared at the hallway entrance, her eyes wide. She said nothing. She understood, even if she didn't yet accept it. "You don't understand," Ethan said finally. "This complicates everything." "I understand perfectly," I said. "It complicates the life you built on lies. And it will continue to complicate it until truth is acknowledged." He leaned against the counter, a posture of resignation I remembered from childhood when he realized his usual tactics failed. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, the first trace of vulnerability in his voice. "I want you to recognize what you have done. I want you to acknowledge that erasing me was a choice. And I want you to live with that knowledge as you continue forward." He exhaled sharply, defeated. You can't just—" "I can," I said softly, almost gently, "because I have been alive the whole time, and I will remain so, with or without your approval." He said nothing after that, and for the first time, I felt a measure of calm. Not triumph, not anger, just a sense that the imbalance had been made visible and that nothing could hide it again. On the 12th day, I finally put words to the decisions I had been shaping for myself all week. I wasn't seeking revenge, nor was I performing some dramatic declaration. This was about boundaries made concrete, about reclaiming what had been quietly taken. I drove to the small law office I had visited earlier and asked to speak with the attorney again. She greeted me with the same calm attentiveness, the kind that makes you realize she has seen people wrestle with themselves and with the world in ways words cannot capture. I laid out everything plainly. The contributions I had made to Ethan's life, the house down payment, the repairs, the bills quietly covered over the years, the courses and unexpected expenses I had taken on without complaint. I explained the lie he had told, how he had declared me dead to everyone around him for convenience, and how he had treated my presence as optional while continuing to rely on what I had provided. She listened, nodding occasionally, taking notes that would serve as the foundation for actions I had not dared to take before. We went through the legal steps calmly and deliberately. I would revoke the power of attorney I had given him years ago. All automatic payments and transfers to his accounts would be suspended or canceled entirely. The funds I had quietly provided over decades would be placed under my control, not out of spite, but to restore the natural order, my resources, my life, my choice. I signed the papers with steady hands, knowing that each signature represented a small reclamation of my autonomy. After the attorney explained the technical details of what the suspension of transfers meant, I felt a strange kind of calm wash over me. There was no rush, no dramatic confrontation needed. The law would enforce what honesty and fairness demanded, whether Ethan wanted it or not. I was done asking for acknowledgement or permission. I was merely asserting what was mine, and the world finally would have to recognize it. Later, I walked through the quiet streets back to the motel. The sun had dropped low, casting long shadows that stretched across sidewalks and lawns. Each step I took felt deliberate. I imagined Ethan arriving home, realizing that the familiar flow of money and accommodation had stopped. I imagined him reading emails from the bank confirming the revocation of all authorizations. He would feel frustration, perhaps panic, perhaps confusion, but that was his responsibility now. For years I had shouldered the work, the worry, and the quiet demands of his life. Now he would bear the consequences of his choices. Back in the motel room, I sat at the desk with my papers spread before me, reviewing everything one last time. I felt no triumph, only the steady pulse of justice as it existed in its simplest form. Truth enforced, balance restored, my dignity intact. Each document, each signed form, was a declaration that I would no longer be erased, ignored, or used without consent. This was not drama. This was quiet power, the kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you will accept. That evening, my phone buzzed repeatedly. Messages from Ethan, urgent and apologetic, from numbers I didn't immediately recognize. I did not respond. I had already made my position clear. I had already acted in accordance with what was right for me. Silence, in this instance, was not avoidance. It was completion. As I prepared for bed, I reflected on the past week. I had flown thousands of miles for a son who considered me dead, witnessed the casual erasure of my life in his narrative, and faced the choice to retreat or assert myself. I had chosen the latter. I had done so not with anger, but with deliberate care and calm. Tomorrow, perhaps, would bring him to a conversation. Perhaps not. But the outcome no longer depended on his acknowledgement. It depended on my action, and that action had been taken fully, deliberately, and with unshakable resolve. This was the point where boundaries became reality, and the weight I had carried for decades began to lift. On the 13th day, Ethan's reaction came in full force, though I had already anticipated it. I had not intended to provoke him. Yet once you stop accommodating another person's convenience at your own expense, consequences arrive whether they are wanted or not. I received a call while I was at the motel, and when I saw his name on the screen, I did not hesitate to answer. My voice was calm, measured, deliberate. "Mom," he said, and I could hear the strain in his tone. "You've gone too far." All the transfers stopped. The accounts. Everything. Lauren is panicking. The bills. He trailed off, the words tumbling in a mixture of anger and disbelief. "I have done nothing beyond exercising my rights," I said steadily. "You mismanaged what was never solely yours to manage. You chose to remove me from your life, and now you must deal with the consequences of that choice." His hand rubbed his forehead, a gesture I recognized from years of similar conflicts, the kind where charm and pleading fail, and only the weight of reality remains. "You can't just. This is ridiculous. You're hurting us. You're being cruel," he said. "I am not being cruel. I am being deliberate," I replied. "You taught me how invisible I was allowed to be, how silent, how compliant. Now I am simply living in full measure, as I always should have." His breathing was sharper now. "Mom, you don't understand. We have responsibilities. I can't pay the mortgage, the utilities, the children, everything." He listed them quickly, one after another, as if speed could make them more urgent, more real, more justified. "You've been able to pay all those things because I allowed it, and you've treated that as though it were your birthright," I said. "Now you must consider them within the bounds of what you can manage." "That is not my problem anymore." "I can't believe you're doing this to your own family," he shouted, the first real crack in the control he always believed he had. "We need you. This is not reasonable. You're destroying everything we've built." I did not flinch. "I am not destroying anything. I am correcting what has been ignored for far too long. I am ensuring that I exist in this reality. That is my primary responsibility now, not your comfort or convenience." He exhaled, pacing briefly on the line, trying to regain composure. "I never asked for this," he said finally, softer, almost pleading. "You're making it personal. This isn't necessary. We all love you." I could hear the tremor beneath his words, the same tremor I remembered in a boy trying to explain away mistakes he couldn't undo. Love is not measured by silence or by absence, or by using someone until they are invisible, I said. Love does not require erasure, and that is what I am addressing. The line went quiet. I let him gather his thoughts, knowing they would be chaotic, unformed, and insufficient. Then I added, calmly, "You may still love me, Ethan, but that does not grant you permission to pretend I do not exist." That permission ended today. Another long silence followed. Finally, he said, I need time to process this." "Take it," I replied, "but understand that time does not reverse decisions already made, only how you respond to them." I ended the call, feeling neither guilt nor triumph. This was not punishment. This was accountability, delivered without theatrics, without dramatics, with no desire to shame, only to assert reality. The weight of years of unacknowledged effort had shifted, and now the responsibility lay where it belonged. For the first time in decades, I felt the quiet strength of standing fully, without compromise, knowing I would not be moved by manipulation or expectation. On the 14th day, I made my final observations before leaving the city. I did not knock, did not call, did not announce my presence in any way other than simply being alive and aware. There is a kind of victory in quiet endurance, in living fully without spectacle. I walked through the streets near Ethan's house one last time, taking in the lawns, the trimmed hedges, the subtle indicators of normal life continuing with or without acknowledgement of my existence. I paused across the street and watched the windows of the house. Lights glowed warmly from within, shadows moved behind curtains, and laughter occasionally drifted out. I knew my son could see me from some reflection or glimpse, though he may not have realized it. I was no longer a shadow to be managed. I was a presence to be acknowledged, even if silently. Memories surfaced of the years I had spent supporting him. The down payments, the repairs, the unexpected expenses quietly covered. Each instance a small act of love that had gone unnoticed. I remembered the moments when I had restrained my questions, my opinions, and my desires in order to maintain peace, to allow him the space he demanded. Each memory was tempered now by the understanding that peace had been one-sided, conditional, and ultimately a tool of erasure. I thought about the lawyer's office, the signed papers, the revocations of authority and control. Everything was in order. My financial independence was restored, and with it, a deep sense of autonomy that had been missing for decades. I realized that I had not arrived in this city merely to witness betrayal or to confront it. I had arrived to reclaim myself, and the reclamation was complete. As the sun dipped low, painting the houses and streets in long shadows, I began walking away. Each step was deliberate, measured, a small declaration that I would continue on my own terms. I passed neighbors, ordinary people living ordinary lives, and I understood that my presence would be noted, quietly, without the need for explanation or dramatics. Recognition had been forced by truth alone. I drove slowly toward the highway, my hands steady on the wheel. The city faded behind me, buildings shrinking, streets emptying. I allowed myself a sense of calm that I had not known in years. My son, my family, the life I had sustained for decades. It was theirs to navigate now. The weight of carrying the needs, expectations, and manipulations of others was no longer mine. When I finally reached the motel to pack my belongings, I felt the quiet satisfaction of someone who has reclaimed her boundaries without malice, without spectacle. There was no need for dramatics. The world already knew the truth. I had acted with precision, with resolve, and without excess. The decisions I had made were deliberate, fair, and entirely necessary. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought of the years to come. My life would be lived fully, without erasure, without expectation that my presence be silent or convenient. I could rest, confident in the knowledge that I had acted in accordance with what was right, steady, and unyielding. The city, the house, the sun, all would continue, but now without the quiet domination of convenience over reality. I slept, knowing that the reclaiming of self had been completed, and that no distance, no flight, and no avoidance could erase what I had restored. This was the quiet triumph of existence lived fully, the steady reassurance that survival and dignity are intertwined. I had come a long way, not to be seen, but to assert that I was still here. On the 15th day, I flew home. The airport felt familiar this time, not smaller, not louder, just ordinary. I moved through it without hesitation, suitcase rolling behind me, shoulders straight, breath steady. No one there knew what I had just lived through, and that was exactly as it should be. Some victories are not meant to be announced. When the plane lifted off, I watched the city fall away beneath the clouds. Somewhere down there was a house with white siding and a blue door, and a son who would now have to explain things he had once avoided. I did not feel satisfaction at that thought, only acceptance. Consequences do not require emotion to be effective. Back home, my house greeted me the way it always had. Quiet, familiar. The chair by the window, the faint creak in the hallway floorboard. I set my bag down and stood there for a moment, letting the stillness settle into my bones. I had not realized how much of myself I had left behind over the years until I felt it all return at once. In the days that followed, messages arrived, some apologetic, some defensive, some carefully worded attempts at reconciliation that spoke more about comfort than accountability. I read them without urgency. I responded only when I chose to, and only in ways that did not betray my clarity. Boundaries, once set, do not require constant explanation. What surprised me most was not my son's reaction, but my own peace. I slept better. I moved through my days without the familiar background tension of waiting to be needed or dismissed. I made plans without checking whether they fit someone else's expectations. I was no longer arranging my life around the hope of being acknowledged. I am 72 years old. I have buried a husband, built a life, raised a child, and learned, far later than I should have, that love does not survive on sacrifice alone. It survives on respect. When respect disappears, silence becomes complicity. Being declared dead was meant to make things easier for someone else. Instead, it forced me to choose whether I would continue to live as if my presence were optional. I chose otherwise. I am still here. Not quietly, not conveniently, but fully. And if you are a woman reading this who has been made small, ignored, erased, or handled for the comfort of others, remember this: it is never too late to step back into your own life. If this story felt uncomfortably familiar, say something. Leave a comment. Share your voice. You don't need permission to exist, and you were never meant to disappear.